She asked if there was space in the single dad's bed. The question stopped Mark cold. It was nearly midnight in a small Ohio apartment, the kind where the heater clicked louder than the clock. Mark had just tucked in his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, after another long day of balancing work, laundry, and homework. Being a single dad wasn't the life he'd imagined, but it was the one he carried with quiet determination. When Lily stood in the doorway, clutching her worn stuffed rabbit, her eyes were wide, not sleepy, but worried. "Daddy," she whispered, "is there space in your bed tonight?" Mark smiled gently. "Of course there is, sweetheart. Always." But Lily didn't move. She hesitated. "Not for me," she said softly. "For Mrs. Thompson." Mrs. Thompson was their elderly neighbor, a widow who lived alone down the hall. That afternoon, Lily had overheard her crying in the hallway after learning her heater had broken. Winter in Ohio wasn't forgiving. Mark felt his chest tighten. He hadn't known. "Why would she sleep here?" he asked carefully. "Because you said there's always space," Lily replied. "And she looks colder than we do." In that moment, Mark realized something humbling. While he worried about stretching every dollar, his daughter had been stretching her heart. Within the hour, Mrs. Thompson was sitting at their tiny kitchen table, wrapped in blankets, holding a cup of cocoa with trembling hands, and grateful tears in her eyes. That night, their apartment felt warmer than it ever had. And Mark understood that sometimes, the smallest homes hold the biggest kindness. Mrs. Thompson tried to refuse at first. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly," she insisted, her pride trembling almost as much as her hands. "I don't want to be a burden." Mark shook his head gently. "You're not a burden. You're our neighbor." But it was Lily who sealed it. "You said grown-ups help each other," she reminded her softly. "And Daddy says we're a team." Something in Mrs. Thompson's face shifted, like a wall slowly lowering. That night, Mark made up the couch with extra blankets. Lily insisted on giving up her favorite quilt, the one covered in cartoon stars. "She needs it more," she said matter-of-factly. As the wind howled outside, the tiny apartment felt fuller. Not crowded, just fuller. Mark lay awake longer than usual, listening. Instead of silence, he heard the gentle clink of a teacup, Lily's soft giggle from the living room, and Mrs. Thompson telling a story about the first snowfall she'd seen in Canada as a young bride. Canada. Mark hadn't known she'd once lived so far away, that she had traveled, loved, and lost. The next morning brought an unexpected twist. When Mark stepped into a hallway for work, he found 3 neighbors gathered near Mrs. Thompson's door. Word had spread. Someone brought a space heater. Another offered to call maintenance. A third insisted on covering the repair cost. Just this once. Mark stood there stunned. All it had taken was one small invitation, one child asking if there was space. And suddenly, the entire building felt less like apartments, and more like a community. By the third night, Mrs. Thompson's heater still wasn't fixed. The repair company kept delaying. "High demand," they said. "Cold front moving through." But something else had moved through the building too. When Mark came home from work that evening, he nearly dropped his keys. Outside his apartment door sat a folded card table, 2 casseroles, a grocery bag, and a handwritten note taped to the wall. "For our hallway family." Inside, Lily was showing Mrs. Thompson how to use a tablet for video calls. "So you can talk to your sister in Vancouver," she explained proudly. Mark paused. "You have family in Vancouver?" he asked. Mrs. Thompson nodded. "Haven't spoken to her in months. Didn't want to worry anyone." That word again, burden. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep between them during movie night on the couch, Mrs. Thompson spoke quietly. "You know," she said, staring at the ceiling, "after my husband passed, I got used to being invisible. People are polite, but distant. I thought that was just how life works now." Mark swallowed. "I get that," he admitted. "After my wife left, it felt like the world moved on without us." For a moment, 2 adults who had carried loneliness differently realized they had been standing in the same storm. The next morning, something unexpected happened. The landlord himself showed up, with a brand new heater. "I've owned this building 20 years, he said. "Never seen neighbors show up like this. Figured I should, too." When warmth finally filled Mrs. Thompson's apartment again, she didn't go back to being invisible. Because kindness hadn't just fixed the heater. It had repaired something much deeper. When Mrs. Thompson finally returned to her own apartment, the hallway felt strangely quiet. Lily noticed it first. "Daddy," she said that evening, poking at her dinner, "it feels colder again." The heater was working. The apartment was warm. But she was right. Something was missing. A soft knock came at the door just after 7. Mark opened it to find Mrs. Thompson holding a small tin wrapped in ribbon. "I believe," she said with a gentle smile, "there's space for dessert." Inside the tin were maple shortbread cookies, her late husband's favorite recipe from their years in Toronto. Lily clapped. Mark laughed. And just like that, the space between their apartments disappeared. Over the next few weeks, a rhythm formed. Mrs. Thompson walked Lily to the bus stop when Mark had early shifts. Mark fixed a loose cabinet in her kitchen. Sundays became shared dinners, sometimes pasta, sometimes shepherd's pie, sometimes simple soup with too much salt and too much laughter. Then came the twist none of them expected. One afternoon, Mark received a call from Lily's school. She had written an essay titled, "There's Always Space." In it, she described how families aren't just the people you're born to, they're the people who show up when it's cold. Her teacher had read it aloud. Parents had cried. The local community center reached out, asking if Lily would share her story at their winter fundraiser supporting seniors who live alone. That night, as Lily practiced reading her essay in the living room, Mrs. Thompson wiped away tears. Mark realized something profound. They hadn't just made space in a bed. They had made space in their lives. And that space was changing more than just their hallway. The night of the fundraiser, Lily's hands trembled. The community center was fuller than Mark expected. Families, retirees, volunteers, people from all over town. Some had driven in from neighboring cities. A few had even come after seeing the stories shared online across the US, the UK, and Canada. Lily stepped up to the microphone, her small voice echoing in the room. "There's always space," she began. "Even when you think there isn't." She talked about cold hallways, broken heaters, and how sometimes grown-ups forget they're allowed to ask for help. She talked about Mrs. Thompson not wanting to be a burden. She talked about her dad saying there was always space. Then she looked at the crowd and said something she hadn't practiced. "Sometimes people don't need a bed. They just need to know they're not sleeping alone in the world." The room fell silent. Mark felt his throat tighten. Mrs. Thompson squeezed his hand. When the applause came, it wasn't just loud, it was long. Donations doubled that night. Volunteers signed up to check on elderly neighbors. A local hardware store offered discounted repairs for seniors during winter months. Driving home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat. Mrs. Thompson smiled softly. "You're raising a remarkable young woman." Mark shook his head. "She's raising me." Back in their small apartment, as snow drifted quietly outside, Mark tucked Lily into bed. "Daddy?" she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart? There's still space, right?" He kissed her forehead. "Always." And this time, he knew it wasn't just about a bed. It was about making room, for kindness, for second chances, and for each other.